16 seconds too much.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Humphrey School. I'm Sherry Gray in the Global Policy area, and I just want to say I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the Humphrey School and to this event. We have such a great set of people here representing 7 different NGOs, and I apologize for our technology. I had a great idea of running a loop behind all of them, and I forgot to set it up, so we hope it'll work now. First, I'm going to introduce our representatives from our co-sponsoring organizations. This event is something that the Global Policy area and the Leadership Management area at Humphrey School envisioned, and we worked together with those who also had a similar vision. Our University of Minnesota student-wide group, IPID, which stands for, they're on the screen, Interdisciplinary Perspectives for on International Development, and Minnesota International NGO Network. And we're hopeful that this can become a series, and we can work with other representatives of our NGO community to talk about some of these issues that are of interest to our students and to our community and to the university. Let me introduce first Kate Kelsch from MIN, who's going to give you a welcome, and then Peter Erisman representing IPID.
Hello, I'm Kate Kelsch. I'm the president of MIN, which is the Minnesota International NGO Network. It's a forum for international practitioners based here in Minnesota to network, exchange ideas, and learn from one another. And our vision really is to be the leading collaborative space for Minnesota international practitioners to exchange ideas and to learn from one another, so that our efforts enrich the lives of people around the world. And the innovative and effective programs that the NGOs that are based here in Minnesota do enrich our global community. And it's really exciting to be here today. Our own organization just got 501c3 status this year. It started about 6 years ago with a group of people who worked in the international field saying, gosh, there's a lot of people here in Minnesota who work internationally. We should be connecting, maybe they're even working in the same country and we could exchange ideas. And so started holding happy hours, and happy hours has expanded from social events to educational events to roundtables and discussions. And we're still forming, but there's a lot of momentum going, and we'd love for all of you to be involved. It's all volunteer organization, so we have no paid staff. Everybody involved is volunteering their time. And I encourage you to check us out on our website. It's minnesotangos.org, and even to join our email list and hear about our events and come and share your learnings, questions, and experiences. And it's great to have our wonderful panelists here today. It's really an honor to have 7 founders and leaders to share their experiences in starting up and going through some of those bumps and how they got started and where they are today. So I look forward to the discussion. We have a series of questions that will get it going, but we'll leave plenty of time for each of you to ask your questions too. So be sure to be jotting down your questions. If you didn't already come with a bunch of them, jot them down along the way. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Peter Erisman, and as president of Interdisciplinary Perspectives on International Development, or IPID, I am honored to have the opportunity to help open today's exciting panel, How and Why Did I Start My NGO? This is IPID's 3rd year. We recognize that there is a chronic lack of coordination between disciplines within international development, including public health, education, economics, agriculture, environmental science, and public policy. Yet many global problems are interconnected within these fields, for example, children's health and education. In response to this fragmentation, IPID seeks to create the space, the forum, and the arena for students, scholars, and practitioners across departments who are engaged in international development to meet, discuss, and debate issues in the field. This is our chance to be critical and to question how development is being implemented. IPID does this through monthly student-led talks, panel discussions such as this, guest speakers, and documentary nights. Many of us are optimistic about NGOs and their unique role in solving the day's global challenges, yet we are concerned about limitations such as funding. Panelists, we are very excited to be with you here. On behalf of IPID and the Humphrey School student body, welcome, and thank you so much for spending some time with us. Enjoy the discussion, and thank you.
If we seem a bit discombobulated, it's because we envisioned this discussion in a less formal setting. Originally, the idea was that we were going to be in a kind of room with comfortable chairs in a circle, and everybody would have their brown bag lunches out, and we would have a more free and open discussion. But today is a very exciting day for the Humphrey School. Our new dean, Eric Schwartz, is starting today. And many of you may know that he is coming from the U.S. State Department, has a career in humanitarian issues, relief, and human rights issues, so we're very excited to welcome him today. And there will be an event this afternoon at the Humphrey School. So we were bumped out of our comfortable room into the large and very formal Cowles Auditorium, and so just to apologize for that. But what we want to do is to create a real sense of dialogue among our panelists and with the audience. And so one strategy that we've decided to adopt, given this space, was to ask a representative, or a couple of representatives from our co-sponsoring organizations to help us facilitate dialogue. And so Kate Kelch, who's representing MIN, and Paul Vlim, who is an alum of the Humphrey School and did most of his studies in nonprofit management and international development, have agreed to help facilitate a discussion. So they're going to start off by facilitating a discussion here with our panelists, and then at some point they'll open it up for all of you to participate. And so just a little bit of information on logistics here. This event is being filmed. We have to speak into microphones. There will be, during the Q&A period, there will be two people running up and down the aisles with microphones so that they can get to you, for you to participate in the discussion. So please don't speak until you get a microphone, and raise your hand high so they can see you after that. So let me introduce Kate and Paul, and let them take it away.
Well, as Sherry said, my name is Paul, and we'll be facilitating with Kate the rest of our discussion. We're going to start off right here with Mark, and we would like you to give your elevator speech of what your organization is all about. 2 to 3 sentences. There's a lot of passion, but you have 2 to 3 sentences, and would like you to say what is your organization about, and we'll go on down the road. And also say who your organization is and who you are as well.
First of all, I'm used to much longer elevators, so. I'm Mark Cross. I'm with MAT2, which stands for Men Against the Trafficking of Others. Is that 3 sentences? Essentially, we are the first and still only organization that targets human trafficking that focuses on the men, which represents the demand side.
And good morning, I'm Segundo Velasquez. I'm with Mano a Mano International. Mano a Mano is hand-to-hand. Mano a Mano works with impoverished communities in Bolivia, building sustainable infrastructure projects to improve health, education, and economic development. Our network of 124 medical clinics have seen dramatic reductions in maternal and infant mortality. And the road and water projects we're building are doubling income of farmers who have been living on less than $1 a day.
Excellent, thank you. And Jan?
I'm Jan Hansen. I represent Educate Tanzania, and thank you for having us here today. Educate Tanzania brings education, water, and health to the neediest parts of the world. That's our mission. Our first project is to build a university in a very remote area of Tanzania, which is next to the Rwandan border, not the Tanzania you see on TV.
Michelle?
Okay, I'm Michelle Gran. I am co-founder with my husband, Bud Philbrook, of Global Volunteers. What we do, quite simply, is to mobilize short-term teams of volunteers to work on long-term development projects, bringing the 12 essential services that every community needs to thrive to host communities. We work in partnership with local communities and local community leaders in 20 countries, on currently 5 continents, used to be 6 continents. And we facilitate about 350 teams a year in non-recession years.
My name is Michelle Boston, and with my husband, Jeff Boston, our organization is called No Time for Poverty. And we are bringing a program of comprehensive medical care for children to a very remote area of Haiti called Port-Salut. Our program consists of a 9,000 square foot medical hospital, an intensive outreach program for children 1 day to 5, and an educational program for the community.
Hi, my name is Jerry Hirsch. My husband, Bob McMurdo, and I founded an organization called, over there, called Bridges to Learning. We actually mostly raise money for the education and health and social development of children in impoverished situations in developing countries. We are spending most of our time now at a school in Vietnam for kids who are too poor to go to public schools. And their education, their health care, their food, and in some instances their housing is provided by our school, which is called An Linh Free School.
Wow, I can't wait to hear more from all of you guys. I'm Jeff Hall. I'm with One Village Partners. And we're a very young group, about 5 years old, very small. And we are working in rural Sierra Leone, West Africa, one of the poorest countries in the world. Similar to Mano a Mano, but much smaller. We're trying to work with at the village level on people that earn $1 or even 50 cents a day or less, and work with them as a community, partner with them holistically, food, health, education, water, and then income, so that they can raise their income and become self-sufficient, and we can move on to neighboring villages, because the only answer to poverty is increased income.
Well, I know that the panelists had asked to know a little bit about who's here today. So if we can just show hands, I'm going to call out a couple of things, and if it relates to you, if you can raise your hand. So we'll start out with students. If you're a student, if you'd raise your hand. Thank you. If you work at an NGO here in town or a nonprofit here in town, if you'd raise your hand. If you're considering starting an NGO or in a budding NGO at the moment. Great, thank you. Board members of NGOs? Okay, and any funders out there? Okay. There's a couple funders too, so that's great. Well, thank you for coming. And now we see who everybody is, but we hope that you'll get new ideas and learn from their experiences. I know they're excited to learn from one another too. We wanted to start out just asking, kind of, what was there a moment that kind of the light went off that you thought, I got to do something. I got to get started. I'm going to start this NGO. And maybe we can just start with 2 or 3 people sharing that and other ones commenting on how their experiences were different. So if 1 or 2, 3 are willing to share that kind of light bulb. Yeah, Michelle.
Actually, for us, it really was kind of a moment. It was how many of you remember the Star newspaper in St. Paul? Do you remember that back in the early 80s? Yeah. It predated the Star Tribune and what is online now. But the moment for us was after our honeymoon. We had kind of an unusual honeymoon in that we spent a portion of our time working on a development project in Guatemala. And when we came back, because I was a journalism student here at the university, my journalism professor said, this would make a really interesting human interest story. So Mike Zuba, Stormy Greener, do you remember those names? From what was then the Star newspaper, did a story on Bud and I. And because of the outgrowth, or the outpouring of interest from that story about us doing this unusual honeymoon, Bud kind of looked at me and said, I think that there's other people who might want to do something similar to this. And given that he is a graduate of the Humphrey Institute and had done work, obviously, in public policy and international development, said, there's no reason why we couldn't do this. Now, keep in mind, I was only 26 years old at the time. I could think of lots of reasons why. At that point in my life, I didn't want to start a nonprofit organization.
Someone else willing to share a different experience? Segundo?
Well, I actually had two moments. One was I was a professor and an advisor on an engineering trip over in this area of Tanzania that we're talking about. It's the Karagwe area. And 5 engineering students came. I had 4 hours to decide whether or not I was going to go on the trip because I am an educator. I was chair of our department at the University of St. Thomas, and one of the engineering advisors had to back out due to a family situation. So I had 4 hours to decide whether or not to go. I went, but I felt as though the people building the solar-powered water pasteurizers really knew what they were doing, and I was just on hand for enjoying the wonderful community and getting to know African people and this and that. And then toward the end of our stay in January of 2008, due to design flaw, the solar pasteurizer did not work. And during that moment, I was looking at these 5 engineering students who were semi-devastated, and I thought, I know what to do with schools. Why am I sitting here trying to find an advisory spot on an engineering program? So I went into the schools, did a needs assessment, much like Bernard Amadei, who was the founder of Engineers Without Borders, and did a needs assessment, came back to the US and realized that, I need to do something here, raised funds. The second moment was when, in 2010, my husband Steve and I went back to this same area of Karagwe, and at the end of a 2.5-week stint there, the management team in Karagwe, the local NGO that we are working with, and just as an aside, insist upon having an effective NGO locally to work with, they asked us to be the ambassadors to the project. And that's when we both realized we want to do something.
So Jen, you mentioned a needs assessment, and that's one of the many types of assessment that we can do as we look into nonprofits and consider starting them. And I was curious if others would like to comment on types of assessments that you did as you looked at nonprofits in the sector already, as you looked at the needs that were there, as you looked at the solutions that were possible. What type of assessment did you do as you considered beginning your nonprofit?
I would very much like to speak to that because I think that for those of us that develop a passion about a need or a country, we're really eager to get in there and do something right away. And that's the first way to make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we did, having said that we made a lot of mistakes, one of the things that we did was we decided we wanted to have a presence in the community in which we had an interest. We began going to Haiti about 9.5 years ago. And so we actually bought a house, and it turned into a guest house and a visitor center. And from that, we started doing a participatory appraisal. And we spent a number of years meeting with a number of groups in the area, the educators, the elected officials, the non-elected officials, health providers. We actually met with the voodoo community as well in Haiti because we needed to consider their positions and they needed to join in with what we were doing. Then after that, we conducted a census of 5 spotted regions, and we trained. The community actually selected the census takers from within the community. After that, we conducted a survey and used the same census takers. Used the same census takers as surveyors. And it was the University of Minnesota, who we want to thank very much for compiling our data. So we had quite a bit of data, and to do that kind of a thing renders you vulnerable to criticism for not starting your project immediately. I mean, we were in Haiti for 7 years before we began digging a hole in the ground. But it was definitely worthwhile, especially in a country like Haiti, where the culture can be so demanding and hard to navigate. So
Great.
That's what we
Thank
did.
you. Could others share some of the?
I'd like to
Jerry?
talk about the flip side of this sophisticated assessment, because we sort of came at this from the passion side as opposed to the intellectual side. Not that we don't know about things like this, it's just that I spent a year and a half in Vietnam teaching at the school that we now fund, principally fund. And I was there teaching English, very informally, no organization, just me. And as I was living there and being with the kids and the teachers and the schools, I realized that they had nothing. And I had to create my own workbooks, my own, things that I taught with for the kids. And that was just the start of it. And so what I realized was that as an expat living in Vietnam, I had access to a lot of resources that the people in my school did not. And so I was just opportunistic. I would meet somebody and they'd say what they were doing, and I'd say, "Jeepers, our school doesn't have that, and maybe you could help us with that." And our children come from the kind of poverty that we really can't understand from our lives, an urban poverty that is it's extremely difficult to survive in. And so whatever we could get made the school and their lives better. The school had important values and brought something to them that they wouldn't have without it, but the school didn't have much. And so my assessment was, this school doesn't have very much of anything. I have access to resources that they don't, and so I'm going to make it happen.
So you had the concentrated year on the ground or year and a half to
Yes.
really live it and see it and experience
Right.
it. Yeah.
I'm kind of a mix of both of you, interestingly. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone in the late 80s, and so I lived in the community for 2 years and developed very, very close friendships. And then left the Peace Corps, and Sierra Leone had the Blood Diamond War in the 1990s. And then I went back and after that and saw how devastated my village was and said, well, these are my friends and my family. I need to help them. And there weren't a lot of NGOs there at the time working. So we started working with the village where I lived and 2 neighboring villages where I worked. And we've been doing that for 5 years. But now as we plan our growth, we'll have more formal assessment tools that we'll use as we go into new villages and expand. So it's that mix of passion, but using our brain. That's the heart and the brain have to work together in this work. Because if it's just the heart, your decisions won't always be necessarily right ones. And if it's just the brain, they won't always be the right ones. So it's got to be working together.
It's very fascinating for me to listen to this because, yeah, there are different approaches across the spectrum, and then there's mixes. But I think if all of us and all of you started to talk, we would just keep adding to these permutations because there's just countless ways to go here. Mattu has probably a form of a mix, but yet another way that we came into being. Our founder is actually Andrew Hansen, who's a Humphrey alum, and he had a passion since he was a teenager. He went over to Mexico on missions trips, and growing up in Maple Grove, he didn't quite see the things that he saw in Mexico. And he came back and he saw various forms of trafficking and labor, and as well as physical exploitation, and he wanted to be involved. And he basically was asked, are you a lawyer? Are you a legislator? Well, you're a man. Thanks, but no thanks. You've done enough. And that burned in him for years and years. And he wanted to do something, but he didn't for quite a while. And he did a lot of cool things, but he didn't really do anything about that. In parallel, I was this big bad television executive forever, and I like to think of television as kind of the opposite of helping people. Very rarely, every once in a while, yeah, there's a news story of how to get out of a car if it goes in the water, and someone happened to see it, and a week later they escape. But we just don't do a whole lot of good there. And I worked for some of the biggest companies, and I had my own wake-up calls and all that. But I was going this parallel mission to look at, from a business side, what could we do for sustainability. There's there's so much in the world that, yeah, you rescue somebody, maybe you counsel them, you may house them, but how do they actually get on with their life? So much like I heard over here of, they need that employment piece, they need that self-sustainability. So I was kind of working on that from an international standpoint, and then Andrew and I kind of came together a couple of years ago. We actually met at the night of the bridge collapse down the road here at 2 a.m, trying to do lots of fun stuff. And basically the piece was, we need to lower the demand, we need to make men aware, we need to rebrand. It's a pimp isn't a funny thing. They're a slave trader. They're human traffickers. And men are the drive of that. But at the same time, as these folks are freed, what are they going to do? Broken education in this country, felony records, on and on. So what we started to get into was this vocational program to say, they don't have months and years with all respect to the educated and educators in here, they just can't go back through that traditional education. They need to be making money quickly and now. So we started to come up with the left brain, the cold-hearted business side of things to say, what can these folks do very quickly to not have to go back? So it was passion, it was uneasiness, and at the same time, it was then trying to draw that business acumen back in to really bear hard on this.
And several of you have, I'm going to move on to another question that's related, and once again, still thinking about assessment. Several of you have mentioned the presence or the absence of people who were working in the areas that you're working with before you even got there. And before preparing for this seminar, I looked up and there are 15,000 nonprofits that are based in the United States that are working internationally, working in most corners of the world. And I was curious, in your environmental assessment, as you look at what other nonprofits are doing, I was curious what you found and how that impacted the way that you designed your own nonprofit, and whether to partner or not. And if you have found organizations that are doing the work that you're doing, what has caused you to partner with them or not partner with them? It's a big question, sorry, but...
Maybe Segundo can start, because...
Yeah.
Was I being left out? Thank you. Yes, I think that's very interesting. There are lots of organizations that are working out there. In our particular case, we identified 90 different organizations that were working in Bolivia in the areas that we were targeting. We systematically called them, talked with them, and tried to get as much information from them as possible, and also tried to find out if there was any way at all we could partner with them. But unfortunately, each organization had already identified their area of work. They were not very interested in what we were interested in. They were not working, and they were not interested in working in rural areas, more in the cities, urban areas, and so on. So at the end, really, we felt that if we were going to do something about this, that we had to set up our own organization. We were able to find some organizations that were willing to or able to partner with us. For example, CRS, that was able to use their duty-free agreement that they had with the Bolivian government to help us in bringing in the millions of pounds of medical supplies that we were shipping to Bolivia. So there are partnerships of that, but not really an organization that was ready to take on your project.
Anyone with a different, yeah, Jan, did you?
I found the same thing, and as you were coming in the auditorium, you maybe passed by the green table there, and I put a little sheet, it's a quarter sheet, and on that sheet I listed the actual things that caused us to align or not align with other NGOs. Educate Tanzania is less than a year old, so we are still in that high of everyone being very passionate, but at the same time, we have a really, I think, discerning and wise group of people who have a lot to offer. But we thought the same as you, whereas why reinvent the wheel? Why start over if we don't need to? And so we did, probably not as systematic, but we did an analysis of all the other projects in Tanzania, and there's a lot of them. We also looked at other developing countries who had built universities. Some of the reasons we decided we could not partner with them are what you mentioned, so I won't go on about that too much, but that our mission would come underneath rather than alongside. Well, people in the area of Africa that I'm working in the average age of dying is 49. The average age of getting married is 13, 14, up to 18. So we don't have a lot of time to come underneath another mission. Also, we have, if you look at our brochure for Educate Tanzania, our partners are listed on the back, and these are some power hitter people that they want to move fast. And so were the other NGOs willing to move as fast as we're willing to move? And I don't mean like recklessly fast, I mean keep at it fast. And then at the top of that list is we have to have a moral alignment so that our belief systems are compatible. We can have differences on the team, but we need to be working for the same goal and not be separated right at the center of that goal. And there's a couple other there that you can read too, but for the most part, that's what helped us decide that we just simply had to form our own after interviewing and all that sort of thing.
For us, there was just so much that we didn't know. We were entering into an area that we didn't know. And I don't know how many times the word passion will come up on this panel, but when we were meeting together, it came up first and foremost. Because everyone who starts an endeavor such as this does have that magic moment where your heart guides you and your head is nowhere, and you make a commitment to the universe that you would never make in another situation. And you commit to something that is so much bigger than yourself if you're going to do it and you're going to do it right. So in our situation, after we had that aha moment, dying children in Haiti, it doesn't take very long to look at a few of them in any community and make that commitment. We needed the University of Minnesota to help with formulation and research. We needed the Navy, who helped us bring supplies. We needed other NGOs in Haiti. We needed Partners in Health, which many of you are familiar with because they know how to do it and they know how to do it right. There were no organizations in our region doing what we were doing, so we reached out to them. We reached out to the Haitian Health Foundation from the University of Connecticut, and just countless organizations that serve as consultants for us. Because as I said, after you commit, something happens in the universe, and you need everyone and everything that you can get to educate and teach you and make this huge thing that you're doing happen.
Does anyone have an example of a partnership on the ground that has been really important and kind of how you develop that? Because I know sometimes when you're coming in as an organization based in the U.S., you have all the resources, so there's sometimes lots of people you can be seen that way. And sometimes there's lots of people wanting to partner, wanting something. But how did you form a effective partnership and that type of thing to work together?
Yeah, our philosophy requires that we work under the direction at the invitation of local people. So we always require an invitation into the community that we're working. And interestingly, for us, our start, we weren't able to do a needs assessment of any sort at all because back in 1984, we predated the internet. We predated long distance information. We predated fax machines. We were of the era of the card catalog. Any of you remember the card catalog, the Dewey Decimal System? Okay. How many of you even remember time before the internet? So imagine trying to do research, international research, without being able to go. And there was nobody doing what we wanted to do, what we had done, and what people urged us to do. And so we had to make it up. And thankfully, our co-founder, the brains of Global Volunteers, who is actually at the International Food Prize in Iowa right now, my husband, it was a graduate of the University of Minnesota Humphrey Institute. And it was during that period of time when we were thinking about doing this. And one of the things he learned in this institution was that you don't do anything without having local development, understanding the local development, understanding the local culture, having local partners, because that is where, as you said, it is so dangerous to make horrible mistakes. Mm-hmm. And there are literally and figuratively, but literally monuments all over the world to American good intentions. Yeah. And it's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to me when I travel to small village communities. And I will give you a really short, very, very brief example. In Malungeni, South Africa, where we work, there is a beautiful Kellogg Foundation-sponsored bakery that has been there for about 5 years, and it has never been used. It's never been turned on. And do you know why? None of you could even fathom to guess. The electricity that is required to run that facility isn't available in this little village. And it's like, whoops. And that wasn't really anybody's fault. It was, under-resourced people are never going to turn down assistance. They're never going to turn down help. They're never going to turn down good intentions. But they may not know what to do with it. And unless you work in partnership, in my opinion, in my very humble opinion, you are setting yourself up to fail.
If I may just comment, again, Mano a Mano really partners with rural communities and the local government and so on. But one of the things that we found very challenging is trying to find other organizations that would be ready and willing to partner with us. Corruption issues in a developing country is always an issue, and of course we want to make sure and guarantee to our donors that their funds are being really looked after and that every dollar is going to the project that it's intended to go to. So really the answer for us was for Mano a Mano really to create Bolivian NGOs. And as a result, we've created 3 separate organizations in Bolivia that are Mano a Mano organizations with their own board of directors and their own management that are focusing in their areas, their respective areas. And as a result, then we can really, if we can say, have influence on the activities and the projects and how those projects are being executed in Bolivia.
So we've been talking a lot about the why of why you started a nonprofit, and I'd like to ask a few questions about the how. And we have organizations that were started 25 years ago and organizations that were started a year ago. And no matter what, the main input of how is money. And I'm curious how you came across the seed money to get your passion turned into organizations and impact. And how did you come across that seed money?
That's where the passion comes in, because Global Volunteers existed for the first 5 years on the Grand Philbrook Foundation. Totally self-funded.
Is that the case with others that?
No, we had a series of cocktail parties, told the story, and showed the photos, got people engaged. I was lucky enough to be in Vietnam when there was an internet, and so I sent a series of letters, 10 letters, from Ho Chi Minh City during the year plus that I was there, that talked about the school and the kids and their stories and what we needed and what I was doing and the people who were there helping. And so when I had a chance to come back, then it was, okay, I've got a great group of friends, wonderful network, people who are cheering me on, and were really interested in what I was doing, wanted to support me and the work and the kids, and so we just kept them. And there was, at the time, there was a sponsorship program already existing. So the first money we got was from people who we asked if they would sponsor a kid for $400 a year, which covered a lot more than one kid. And then it was after that that we decided, one of our funders suggested that he could give us a lot more money if we were nonprofit. And so that was the thing that stimulated then the work for the 501c3. That's when Bob went to work to put all that in place.
Some different examples? Yeah.
Again, trying to start an NGO when you don't know people that have resources, power, political influence, and so on, is really, really challenging. And I think what in our particular case, then you really relied on what you had. And it was, in our particular case, it was great that we had a place where we could actually store some of the medical supplies that we were collecting. And the medical supplies filled the back room and filled the driveway with tarps filled in. There were a couple of huts and so on. And it was our van that really picked up the medical supplies. But soon our friends started pitching in, and other people started helping us. And I remember very clearly the first time that a friend of ours handed me a $20 bill. And I couldn't believe it that that person was actually trusting me with his money. And it was, it made such an impression, and it told me the level of responsibility now that I had to make sure that that money was used in the way that that person intended it. So it's very challenging.
We had a similar thing where our friends and my students at the University of St. Thomas they couldn't help but hear the story because I wouldn't be quiet about it. And so I just, would tell stories about what was going on in Africa. And similar to this, people would stop me in the stairwell and give me some money. And we had a fiscal agent at the time, which was a church in Wisconsin. So the money had to go there and then come back, and we had all kinds of interesting things. But when one of the women at St. Thomas donated science equipment so that I could outfit a lab over there, and that got a lot of attention because we needed bubble wrap, and our garage was full of people wrapping up test tubes and Bunsen burners. And so that sort of thing took form. But what surprised me is that I'm basically a shy person, but what it brought out in me is that my personal stories, my animation and things, I think what was a starter, yeah. But you need some legitimacy if you're going to approach some power structures. So I believe that our web development made all the difference in the world. I believe that our partners who are willing to vouch for us made a big difference. But the part about being shy is that I have learned there's a whole new me in here. And I am not shy anymore. And in fact, at our board meeting last night, they all teased me because I've just become someone who just plain asks for things. And it's amazing what we get. And I think some people are just waiting to be asked. The last thing I'll say is that people want to be part of something really good. We had our first board meeting last March. We held an event at a local venue in June. We made $17,000 at that venue, and 8,000 more of people who told me they couldn't come but wanted to donate. So that was our seed money, and now we're on to bigger amounts.
I'd just like to piggyback on what Jan said. It's absolutely true that people want to be connected to something that they feel is being effective. And if you have personal passion and connection to something, which you will if you're starting an NGO, your friends and family want to support you because everyone doesn't have the gift of being involved in something that's directly addressing some problem, because people have various kinds of jobs and many of them mundane, and they want to feel connected to something real. So when I went back to Sierra Leone after the war, I just had friends and family send me like $6,000, like, oh, I'm sure you're going to need this. I hadn't even thought about it. And then when I saw that my whole village was destroyed after the war, I said, wow, I've got an opportunity and a privilege here to help my friends again. And obviously Americans have resources, and there's money available in our country. Obviously we're, I guess the richest country in the world. So you will find money if you have a great story and great passion. And we also used our church as a fiscal agent. So I also recommend, before diving into starting an NGO, try it as a less formal startup and find a fiscal agent that can handle your money for you, where people can make a tax-free gift and see how things go. And then you can always take that next step if you want to, but you don't want to just jump in and do all that 1 year of work and legal hassle unless you really have to.
Our situation is a little different, so I'd like to just speak to it for a moment. When you're building a hospital and you're taking all this time to learn about the community after your passion kicks everything else in, things develop slowly. And so in our situation, people knew we were doing this for a very long time, but it didn't happen. We had, from the start, my husband and myself intended to fund our own 501c3, which is what we did. And while we have today taken in a surprising amount of money from where I sit from other people, it's taking a surprising amount of money to get this done. And so it had been our commitment to develop the project, build it, and for the first 5 years be able to fund it for 5 years. We wanted to take the position that we wanted to put our energies into getting the hospital built so people could see brick and mortar. When you talk about brick and mortar, it's not enough. And you could either put your time into startup, but if you're in a situation where you have the funding, then that's the best use of that funding. Having said that, I do think this is an amazing country, amazing people. My children's generation want to give back more than any other generation before. But it is hard. Money is hard to come by, and don't kid yourself.
So what advice or tips might you have those who have been around a little bit longer from moving from that startup phase to kind of having some level of financial stability? Because I know you tap your friends and family, but at a certain point either you grow or maybe their pockets get a little smaller or things like that. And any tips or advice from moving from the startup to
Built a
more
board of directors with as wealthy a people as you could find and connected, and that's the bottom line.
There's one way.
I'm here for the practical.
Our model is very much like Earthwatch and Red Cross and whatever, and that is a pay-as-you-go. We are totally a self-supporting private nonprofit. So what that means is that our volunteers pay the cost of their experience with our program. It's a totally tax-deductible service program fee that they pay. I actually have a couple of people. I've got a 19-time volunteer in the year. And so that way, they pay the actual cost of including our administrative fees, et cetera. Again, because my husband is a graduate of this school, he learned that he did not want to be a partner with the government and be beholden to all of the, the criteria, and said, I will tell you this for sure. One of the things we're not going to do is to set it up so that we are going to have to be writing for grants every year. So.
I actually worked for the Red Cross here for a few years. I joined when the merger happened, St. Paul and Minneapolis, and we literally took our budget down from something like 15 million or so at the merger down to 8, down to 7, and actually expanded services. And that's something that into the for-profit world for me. And it's really looking at efficiency and looking at different ways to perceive how to do things. Whether you have nothing or whether you have a lot, there's still just different ways to think of things. I was connected to a project in Rwanda a while back, and it's the old joke of, when I heard about the bakery, it was kind of coming back to me, you build $1 million library, but then, there's no books. And when you flesh that a bit, do you really need the structure? Do you really need the building? do you even need the books now? And I come from pre-internet era, but at the same time, we do so much in the virtual world now, and a lot of that really hasn't come into the NGO world. And as you start to blend that power, where I have 4 or 5 meetings a day in coffee shops in this zip code or in many others. I'm on a plane next week to be in other coffee shops in other geographic areas, but the cost of that is almost nothing. And to work incrementally, to look at what your needs are, and to not grow too fast. Before we came up, kind of joking or not joking perhaps about the Gates Foundation and so much money, but that's almost like the Oprah effect. Yeah, if Oprah would only talk about my bakery or my book or whatever, I've got it made. But even if you get the $1 billion or the 100 million, does that really speak to the initial passion? Does that really fulfill your true mission, or does it start to change it or alter it off course? So there's a balance of that energy. Sorry, last point. I'll shut up. You talked about being relatively shy, but the word you didn't say was sincerity, because when you really speak from the heart, it's past excitement even, but it's just very real, and say, hey, there's these kids, there's these adults, there's this situation. 50 cents a day, $1 a day is a very real level. I once contribution in China for, sorry, this sounds like it's cutting out. I once contribution in China for about $20 US for this charity. It was at a cafe. Turns out I was the first customer ever to do that, and they were giving up hope, and it was an uphill battle, and it's in Shanghai. It's not the most hospitable for NGOs, and that contribution turned out to be the first ever from a customer. I had no idea, and it was nothing truly from me. So we talk about being handed $20. So anyway, long story short, a year and a half later, that chairwoman now knows about Matu and now is helping us connect into the government, because China, of course, officially has no problem with human trafficking, because if they did, that would be embarrassing. But yet, we now have a presence there because of a $20 equivalent thing.
Amazing.
So,
Amazing.
all these things.
I had a question. As we think about, once again, there's a lot of passion on the stage about very important issues. But what we're talking about is not just passion, but turning that into an organization. And what that means often in nonprofits is having a board and having an organization that's owned by the community. No longer owned by the people who had the original passion, but owned by a community. I was wondering if a few of you would like to talk about how that process has been of sharing your passion, maybe even giving your passion over to other people to do the work as well as encouraging others in that passion.
Are you talking here? Are you talking globally? Or what do you mean?
So as you take on a board of directors, they're officially the ones who are in charge of the organization. How do you make that work as someone who has the initiating passion, that they're now the ones that are in charge? And then more than that, how do you share that passion with them so that they're also interested, but even further, how do you get others interested?
Well, I will tell you that I believe that the Humphrey Institute does teach that there's different levels of development of a nonprofit organization. Yeah. And you need different boards at different times. And now that we are in our 28th year, we started out with a board of 21 people, and you can kind of imagine how well that worked. Really passionate. But that was what was needed to really get this going. And so now we still have our 5 trustees. Much smaller board. We've exhausted some boards. We've frustrated some boards. We've alienated some boards. It always kind of depends upon what's happening at the time. But as long as you can keep that core group of people who are committed and faithful to that original vision, which I'm really proud to say we still adhere to like it's our last breath. I think the board can take on many different roles and different complexions. I don't know about you.
I think it's very important that the people that you are that you want involved in your passion really take on that become part of what you are trying to do, that they get involved and that they see the projects that and the impact that these projects are having. Because really you get to the point where when you see or when you know a person that has to travel for 17 hours when they're in labor and they have to cross rivers, they have to go on a donkey, walk, and when you see that, when you know of this, then really it's very you are taken by that, and you want the people that are going to be involved to really know of that, or to see that. And I think the hope is that they will become involved in that.
One of the things as you're talking about that is just that not everybody can go see it. I don't know if you have any, how do you translate? It's like many of you talked about you were there, you saw this, and you needed to act. But a lot of people can't go there, and I'm just wondering what have been useful tools, I know it's stories and pictures so far, but are there other ways that have really moved people, or have those been the key things?
One of the ways that we involve our board members is that it's a requirement that you sponsor a kid. And so you end up with a real live experience with a real live child, and you get letters and pictures and all those things, but it's not a form letter. It's written by the kid. It gets translated either here or there. And so there's a personal relationship that then becomes expanded to the school and to be able to tell their own stories. And some of our board members actually have been able to go to Vietnam, and then they can come back and they engage other people. Now, we also had our first board, I think 2 of the 5 members had visited me in Vietnam, and we lost them, a couple years down the road. It was sort of like the trip was more important than the issue or the goal. And so that's not a guarantee that they're going to be there and take on this same passion. But it is a way that we keep our board members engaged and involved, and then we put them to work too, helping us with our galas and our, all those other things that we do.
Our organization is just a year old, so we'll see if this works. But part of our mission that we don't write down, but it's our spoken mission to each other, is that we don't want to detract from the other good work that people are doing. And so that relates back to your question where, call it leading from the middle or leading from behind. You recognize what other people's gifts and talents are, and that they get to contribute that, so that when they come to us, they're coming somewhere where they're celebrated for what that is. And if they are passionate about another cause, which we all are up here, and my chances of getting you to come to my organization and participate are probably pretty low. But it's the idea that we bless them when they come, we bless them when they go. They get to go, and I personally think that's a good thing. There's enough stuff to do in the world that they don't really have to come through our portal, although I'm doing my best to pull them all in. So we'll see how this works.
That's great. I know that we want to open it up to the community here, to those who have joined. So while our mic runners are getting their mics, I would want to ask, would you do it the same way again? Would you start up your organization in the same way as you look back? And maybe another way to put it is, if you knew then what you know now, what would you tell yourself? How would you do it differently? Or would you do it differently?
I think maybe one of the things that I might say is maybe not what you are asking, but if I knew now, then what I know now, probably I wouldn't have started the organization. if I knew how much work it was going to be,
Yep.
and how difficult it was going to be to really find the resources and so on, I wouldn't have done it. But on the other hand, there have been so many wonderful rewards. People that I have met, I think it was said here that our country and the people are very generous and very ready to help. And there's a tremendous need out there. If we can really just see or open our eyes to see that need, and if the solutions that we're proposing, as we're saying, not a white elephant that we want to build out there, but we want to make sure that whatever we're doing has been thought out through, that it is going to operate the way that it was designed or conceived, that we can make sure that there is no corruption, and we can make sure that the quality of care that we deliver is the best. Then I think then we can see that we're having an impact and the difference that we make. And I think that makes it all worthwhile.
I'm ambivalent, quite frankly, as to whether I would have done this again. For those of you that have children, if you can ever remember a time before you had them, and then all of a sudden you have them, you wonder, what did I do with my time before I had my children? For me, the ambivalence is, it's enormous. It's bigger than anything I've ever done. And I've done some big things in this lifetime. But the flip side of that is I am keenly aware that I am on this earth for a very short amount of time. And I came to believe that I was put here to make a difference, because I can't imagine, with all the suffering in the world, that there's any other reason to be on this earth than to address that suffering. And so I don't even know that my husband and I chose to bring a program of comprehensive medical care for children to this remote area of Port-Salut in a 9,000-foot hospital, et cetera, et cetera. It chose us. I mean, for all of us here, I think we would say the same thing. It chose us. And for good or for bad, that's what we're here to do. My advice that I would give to anybody is, you have to, and it comes back to passion, it comes back to exactly where we started. You have to make that commitment, even if it's at a moment, to follow through no matter what it takes. And I know I sound like a broken record, but the truth is, it takes a lot. It takes a lot.
It's like having a child, like you said. So if there are 15,000 other organizations, so take a good hard look around and see if one of those might benefit from your talent and energy. And if you really have to have your own child, then go ahead and do it. But it's a lifetime commitment.
I also want to sort of echo the ambivalence. The amount of work is phenomenal. Disappointments that you never would expect. And then you get over that, so you have these growth opportunities through all of those things. And so there's that part. And there is an enormous satisfaction to know that in our instance, we've got 400 kids whose lives will never be the same. They have opportunities that they would never have had. We've built 2 new schools for them. They have computer labs. They have real chance in this life. And my belief is that they will make chances for their kids, in their communities, in their families. And then you go, jeepers, you know? I started out as one person, and then we were 2 people, and then we were a few people. And, you know, if you think about a legacy that you want to leave, that really feels pretty good. And the icky stuff, you know, it's there, and it doesn't go away necessarily, but the joy is just worth it.
I think there's opportunities in nonprofit world that really doesn't exist anyplace else. And I think all of us and most of us here are the type of people who are going to be passionate about how we spend our 24 hours every day, regardless. And to do it in a way that you know has significant impact on other people's lives is, for me, tremendously gratifying. Again, 28 years ago, we thought that what we were going to do was to create this little side avocation. In fact, while it predates the internet, it doesn't predate Beta SP 2-inch videotape. And there are tapes out there that have my husband and I stating that we will never take a dime from Global Volunteers. Because that was at the time, our intention was to send a couple of teams every year and to provide an outlet for people like us who kind of hippie holdovers, you know, who wanted to feel like we could impact, you know, the tremendous need in the world. And it grew and it grew and it grew, and we have a couple of volunteers here, long-time volunteers who have been with us from the very, very beginning, who had a belief in this and kept propelling us, truly, this is not platitudes, kept propelling us to do it and to do it longer and wider and greater. And so, like so many of us, I think it had to be done.
Had to be done.
And we were doing it, and we were being encouraged to do it. So, you know, I could never claim to have said, yes, we had this big scheme, and yes, we did this needs assessment, and saw exactly where this niche was, and we were the people to do it. And so when I did it, no, it wasn't like that at all. I mean, it was something more, we made more mistakes in the early years than we did have positive benefits. But it was the propulsion of the greater need, I think, was that. And so I absolutely would do it again, but I want to do it next time with the internet. It was too hard the other way.
Luckily, we're there, so if people are starting their NGOs, they have that benefit right now. Well, now we want to open it up for you. We hope you've got new insights and ideas already, but we imagine that you have gotten some questions along the way. So the people, again, if you can raise your hand and we can bring the microphones over.
Hello, my name is Ahai Wadajo. I am from Ethiopia. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the two agencies to coordinate this. It's just an eye-opening, inspiring, affirming experience that I got. I represent Resources for the Enrichment of African Lives. I founded this organization, and I'm a volunteer for 7 years to focus on the education of girls and women. We started in Ethiopia, and we also started Girls Empowerment Institute here to link them together, you know, for the work that we do over there. So it's hard, as you were sharing, you know, to be a volunteer and to have the inspiration, yet you know, it's really very hard if you don't have the resource. But we reached out to our friends and relatives and different groups of people to help to assist us in going. So we're getting there. And I want to ask you, what is the limit that you can put on as a volunteer, and you say, now I have to really give all my time to this work? And so I just wanted to ask you that question. And I'm heading to my regular job, but if you have a question about the organization, Sierra is entering with us this year. We have an intern, so you can ask her questions about our organization. But I just wanted to ask the time that you say, I can't be a volunteer no more, and how can I meet the other areas of, you know, my life to just take the risk. So
And
thank
maybe
you.
just to add on kind of how you found those limits for yourself, because I know this work can be all consuming too, and if there's things that you've done to set limits, or if you're just fine with, you know, jumping in 24 hours and that's worked okay, or some insights, maybe some that haven't had a chance to share for Mark. I don't know if you know you're getting started, but or others insights in this arena.
You have to have limits. You have to have limits. They may not feel comfortable at the time, but you're going to burn yourself. Speaking as a person who doesn't seem to know my limits until I absolutely hit the wall. That is not a good thing. you just draw some limits, and because it will consume you, and your family will pay the price, and your friends will pay the price, and your health will pay the price.
I think really continuing to reach out to other people, because people will burn out. And so the more people you can involve in this work, the better it is for everybody. And setting limits.
The limits I set were probably a little different than some others, and that is that I don't want to make this sound easy, but I resigned my tenured spot as a professor to do this for 2 years, so my 2 years is my limit. However, I'm willing to negotiate as we approach that deadline. But I did want to say, too, that I am having the absolute time of my life. And I don't mean it that I'm infatuated and don't see the challenges and I'm just on a high. I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And we're doing it well, and the doors are flinging open. And I will tell you that as soon as I resigned, I had my 60, 70 hours that is needed to get this off the ground. And so that's my limit as far as the effect on my family. I've never seen them so happy for us and another group of people. So it's all been good so far.
And I actually did reach the limit. I started this when I was 59. And last year, that included my time in Vietnam, last year I decided for health reasons and burnout reasons and all that it was time that we needed to hire somebody who is a professional executive director. And so this year has been a transition. We have a new person on board who is a paid person and works very hard too. And so it's the transition, handing it off, trying to pass on the organizational memory, those kinds of things. But now, it doesn't mean I'm not involved, because I am very involved yet, but I do have some time to take a nap or play golf.
That's a whole nother topic we'd love to dig into, that transition planning. But I want to make sure we get questions here, and we have one up front still.
My name is Ati Westfall. I'm a student in the College of Design and Architecture, a master's student in sustainable design. And I'm currently writing my thesis on a project in Cambodia where I've been involved for the last 3 years. That what I'm aiming to do in my thesis is to present some possibility for architects to form an alternative form of practice working in the developing world on projects where they actually can make a living and actually fulfill their ethical duty as architects, as opposed to more commercial work here in the United States. There's this growing interest in this subject. There have been other organizations like Architecture for Humanity, which were developed. I think that we're also now getting frustrated with those because they've been largely a big PR pitch and a media thing for those organizations to raise a lot of money for themselves, but then what we're seeing is that the results are not so good, and that architects actually still don't have the opportunity to go immerse themselves like you would in the Peace Corps. So I wanted to just ask that, how many of you who've worked internationally have engaged with architects who have actually put in time on the ground for a long period of time to assess, to learn something about the culture, to learn about how development works, and to really see to it that things that you have been looking into in terms of constructive pieces, that they're built very well and in a functional way that serve the needs.
And maybe some tips just for how you might engage architects that are here in the States too.
I don't know if you've checked out MSADA, which means it's Swahili, and they've been in the developing world for over 60 years. That's not true, it's 30 years. They visit their buildings to make sure that they're still functional. They use local materials, local employees, and we're in the process right now of hiring locally in Africa so that we can use what they've created, but also have a structure that'll last longer than the ones that are being created just by locals. So we're talking about importing some expertise that would buttress what else is going on.
They're based
And,
locally here too.
Sorry?
Masada's based locally here in Minnesota as well.
I think it's, oh, I'm sorry.
Just tell me where it is.
I'm happy to hear from you because I think it's a very, very exciting time for the melding of people like you in architecture doing work in third world countries. In our situation, we were very lucky to find an architect in Minnesota who had actually built in Haiti. And today, with the use of high impact panels, 2 years before the earthquake, we had them in country to build our clinic. There's so much going on with solar, and there's great opportunities all over the world in third world countries right now. If there aren't large organizations to affiliate with, I would recommend coming to know a country very, very well, because there's enormous, right now in Haiti, enormous opportunities.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm a student of international development here at the Humphrey. I have a question about transitions in nonprofit organizations. So you've talked about how it's really important to stick to the vision and the mission and the purpose that you gained at the beginning, but you've also talked about transitions that happen. And I want to share an example. Tom's Shoes, for example, originally thought their mission was shoes. You get a pair of shoes here, they throw out a pair of shoes there, but then they realized that their knitting wasn't shoes. It was actually the one-for-one principle. So I was wondering if any of you could share a little bit about transitions in what might be considered your core mission and how it can be difficult to augment your activities or even change your initial mission. So can everyone share experiences with that? Thanks.
I could give you a real current example of that. We're just in the midst of this, but it's more of an evolution. I wouldn't really call it a transition, but it occurred to us a couple years ago. We're in special consultative status with the United Nations. The United Nations has very clear structures on how they encourage NGOs to assist local communities. And they have something called the essential interventions. And these, as I mentioned before, are the essential services that every community needs, whether it's Matamirai, Minnesota, or it's Malungeti, South Africa, or it's Anshang, China. Every community needs these common services to enable the community to reach their human potential, human and economic potential. So a couple years ago, we decided that we were going to try to start bringing all of those essential services to all of the communities where we work, to the extent that they were able to partner with us in that regard. And that changed the way that we formed our work projects with our host communities and the way that we recruited our volunteers. And it is really now has become, well, actually we just, I mean, this publication is 1 week old. We just published this publication that talks about the essential services and how short-term volunteers can literally, in just a short period of time, bring these to people all over the world. And so I think for us, it's more a matter of growing, well, it's maturing. You know, it's maturing as an organization and building on what we've learned to try to do what we have always done, but do it better. I mean, I guess, you know, I'm 57 and I kind of feel like I'm doing better now than I did when I was 27 or 37, you know, in some areas. I think it's just an evolutionary process.
How about others that have had their NGO around for a while? Did your mission evolve, or has it really stayed the same?
I think in our particular case, we really continue to respond to this incredible need that we were seeing on the ground. And really, it would be communities that would appeal to us with the next need that they would have. And because we're working again with the 3 separate organizations now that are focusing in various areas, it is still within our mission but just really focusing in those areas. So we really respond to the needs that are coming from the communities themselves.
Thank you. And are we? Oh, sorry, Jerry.
We have a slightly different issue. Actually, the transition issue is also present for us too. But we have to keep focused on what our mission is, because we have a lot of people who are very interested in our school. All of a sudden, it's become, a hotspot for young people to want to go and visit and spend some time, and groups of kids from Singapore who want to come and do something with our kids. Well, and then they'd like to stay and have a dormitory, and they'd like to be there for the summer, and all these things which are fabulous. They're just fabulous for the school and the kids. The problem is they would like our organization and our school to manage all that. And we have to keep saying, our mission is not to run an international experience for poor little rich kids from Singapore. And so it's like, this is what we're about. We can get sucked into that. We can get seduced by that. We have to find some other way to do it, because we can't. We'll just be dissipated till, our money, our time, our energy. We can't do it. So
I just wanted to ask before we go here to another audience question, is for those, I think there's 3 of you that have organizations that are more new, if you could speak briefly to the process of developing that mission and creating something tight that will excite and clearly state what you're trying, excite others and clearly state what you're trying to do.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're about 5 years old. And we started, after visiting post-war Sierra Leone, there's a tremendous need for shelter for farmers, because they know how to farm, but their houses are falling down all the time. They were getting sick and they couldn't farm. So, it was very clear that my friends needed roofs. So the roofs last 40 or 50 years, and by that point, hopefully their income's higher and they can get their next new roof on their own. But started out with that, and then of course, they're my good friends, so we couldn't just stop there. And they needed clean water, so we went to clean water, and then mosquito nets and scholarships, other things. So just one thing led to the other, and it became, let's have measurable improvement in quality of life. Well, and then we started doing a strategic plan as we got aboard, and it became, we had to have that sustainability component where we're not going to be here forever just increasing the quality of life forever, but trying to create self-sufficiency. And how do you create self-sufficiency? That's a very big question. How do you make our work sustainable? Because we shouldn't be doing everything that we're doing forever. So then our mission became trying to have like a 10-year model where we work holistically and increasing income, and at a certain income level, then they're fairly self-sufficient. They can send their own kids to school and pay for health care and continue to improve their farm and grow their income. And then we go on to neighborhood villages. So it does evolve, but you also have to stay very focused so you don't get distracted. But it will continually evolve. Yeah. If you stay true to your real mission, and in our case, that's what can we do to fight extreme poverty at the village level, the very poorest level. That's really what we're trying to do. And the question is, what's the best mechanism to do that? So we're trying to create a measurable model that'll be open source on our website, because I think there needs to be a lot more sharing among nonprofits. We all learn things, we make mistakes, we learn things that are good, we learn things that don't work, and we want people to critique what we're doing and add to what we're doing and be able to do it other places, because we don't want to do it everywhere. We just want to stay focused on what we're doing, where we're doing it.
Janet, Mark?
There's certainly a balance, because you're dealing with the words what and which and where and when, and you initially make those decisions, but as you hear from amongst most everyone, things come up. Now mosquito netting, okay, it's great that the rain isn't hitting me, but now mosquitoes and education and nutrition and this, all these things come together, and they're all worthy and they're all good. So the question becomes, well, should we be doing this? Or maybe there's a collaboration, or maybe there's a connection, or do you just ignore something and not do that? What's the purity of your mission? And those are really tough decisions. In our case, still quite new. A little bit like Mano a Mano, we actually have 2 entities already, and the one was still beginning, a year ago. But that can help you stay focused because you know the umbrella mission is this, but to be able to focus one entity and say, no, this is the specific mission, this is what it does. So in Matu's case, it's education and awareness and involvement, and you know it's men over here. But now for the other side, you know, where are the economic opportunities, where are the business opportunities? Okay, well, we decided that's a separate entity to kind of keep that focus there. Literally had lunch a couple weeks ago with a pastor from the Philippines who feeds 500,000 children a day through his work over the last, you know, infinity years. And he's invited me out in a couple of weeks, and we're going to start, he's senators and governors and all this, and we're going to start in a couple of towns, but then a couple of months back from there, we're going to then hook into 6 cities there with him. And that has the power to swallow us, or that has the power to expand our reach into a country that's sorely, sorely in need of a lot of things. So you know, and so that's a breaking news story. So you know, tune back with me in late January, and you know, and we'll see where that goes. You know, we think that is wonderful. We think that's a wonderful opportunity, but you know, that could also just totally change who we are. So I think that's something that call by call, opportunity by opportunity, need by need, you really have to be very quiet, very mindful, and you know, just see where that flow takes you. Because if it takes you too far off, it might be a great thing for them, but the whole rest of the thing implodes or collapses, except my architect friend is gone here.
Here, and then we'll go on over there.
My question is about self-sufficiency, which I'm glad you just mentioned that now. I don't think I'd heard too much about that beforehand. What strategies do your NGOs have in place to promote self-sufficiency and prevent a culture of dependence that can easily arise? To pick on a kind of an easy example, like World Vision, you know, it's great to sponsor a kid, but what happens when they turn 18?
Right.
So what active measures do you guys do to prevent that?
I always hate to be the first one starting out, but I'll do that. That's a great example, and I will tell you that we faced that situation. We work in a community in Lima, Peru, where we work at an orphanage, the largest orphanage in South America. And that question was asked because up until just a couple years ago, our assistance to that host partner was to work in the orphanage and to do conversational English and recreational programs with the kids. And then at the moment that they turned 18, those kids were, well, they were turned out on the streets, basically. Sue knows, she's been there and she's got kids that she loves there. And so it was our volunteers, God bless them, that came to us and said, this breaks our hearts. What can we do about that? And one of our volunteers put up $10,000 to start a sponsorship program to help the kids transition from this cloistered life of this orphanage to facilitate education, like in a kind of the equivalent of our VOE or VOTEC kind of education, and to help pay for their living expenses because they can't live on the campus of the orphanage anymore. And we confront those kinds of complications all over the world where we work. And it is through the creativity, which is now, I guess, called crowdsourcing. People who have ideas that they have learned from other circumstances, and we try to draw on that to get a sense of how we might be able to expand the sustainability of the type of assistance that we're trying to provide.
Thank you. Other
I think it's an excellent question again, and I think it's something that we have to really focus on. In our particular case with Mano a Mano, with one of the organizations, Mano a Mano Apoyo Aéreo, we have aircraft that provide emergency air rescue transport. And one of the things that we do with them is really make the airplane available for private flying, be it maybe tourists but they are charged the commercial rate, and in that way we can actually generate some funds for the self-sufficiency of the organization. But in the communities, we're working with them really to increase their economic capacity. The water and the roads are doing that. And in that way, they're not going to be waiting for an organization or for us to go and do some other project with them, but rather they're going to be able to take action on their own.
One other, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm really struggling with this whole issue of sustainability, and in a project like ours, how to create that, and all the community participation, all the years we spend immersing ourselves and building partners in that. But I have to tell you that a few months ago, read a quote by Paul Farmer of Partners in Health, and he said, this is being filmed, so I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but to the effect that, sure, it's better to teach people to fish than give them fish. But if there are no fish to be fished, then you're missing the boat. I think that there are some situations in which sustainability may not be, at least for a very long time to come, something that is focused upon, but saving lives, getting people fed, getting people healthy, sometimes any way you do it, you have to do it. And our organization is struggling with that right now. And I don't want to minimize the absolute importance, the critical aspect of sustainability, but every situation doesn't lend itself to an easy answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think sustainability of purpose, though, is important, and I think that's what you're talking about. As long as you're working with local people on a long-term vision, the immediate crises can be accomplished in can be dealt with in a number of different ways.
Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you for this panel. It's been very informative. My name is Sarah Zanussi, and I'm a recent college graduate, and hopefully eventually aspire to start my own nonprofit music school under the El Sistema system, which is in short a Venezuelan street orchestra that now, if you know Gustavo Dudamel, and anyway, there's a huge movement coming to the U.S. And so I'm just wondering, as a younger person, for those of you who started a nonprofit back in the day, I worked in Tanzania for a year, and the person who was the director was 28, hadn't gone to grad school, and so there were a lot of challenges, and she was learning on the job, but it was difficult for her employees. So I'm just wondering when you kind of thought was the right time to start the organization, or do you just have to dive in? Are there any resources you'd recommend besides, just books on nonprofit and graduate school? It seems like a lot of you have had a nonprofit management background or a spouse who has that. So
young folks just starting out, what would be one word of advice maybe, or one piece of advice maybe each of you would offer for young folks?
I would just say experience. You got to work in some organization. I was in the Peace Corps. I got an MBA, so I worked in the private sector. I still do. I started my nonprofit as it's kind of my vocation, and now we're staffing it. But you have to work in an organization, private sector or nonprofit sector, to understand how systems work, how to manage people, how to be a good writer, all those skills that you need no matter what you do before you go out and start your own. That's pretty basic. But
Sherry, did you have?
I think that's right on. Get yourself some experience, because not only do you have to have some skills, but you have to have some confidence that's based on something that you've done, on experience. And I think my husband would say, learn about accounting.
That's always good.
Other different pieces of advice?
Volunteering for other organizations, especially in the area that you're interested in, really understanding what that involves. Partnering with other organizations that can potentially take on the tasks or projects that you're involved in, and then eventually maybe breaking away from that and starting focusing in the area that you were interested in?
Well, back in the day, there weren't as many resources as there are available now, and so people have said, Michelle, I can't imagine how you did what you did, and you've done so much. And I said, the only difference between me and you is that we just did it. We just decided to do it. I don't know, is there a good time to have a child? Really, it's one of those really big, important questions. Seriously, is it a good time to buy a house now? I don't know. I mean, it's one of those really big, important decisions that you have to in life, and somehow you just know. I mean, when you get married, you have children, you buy a house, you do all those kinds of things. I'd put starting a nonprofit in exactly the same category because it's something you're going to live with for the rest of your life, probably. If you do it well and if you're passionate about it. And it is really like, I have 3 adult sons, and Global Volunteers is like another child.
In my particular case, for a long time, I had been hand-carrying medical supplies to Bolivia. I was born in Bolivia, and every time that I would travel to Bolivia, family members and others would say, on your trip, next trip, could you pick up this, and could you bring that, could you do this, and so on. And constantly I was taking these, stuff to them. But just like it was said here, I learned and I was told that if I incorporated into a formal organization, we would be able to access more of these supplies, and which we did. And you can see at the beginning, I received a handful of instruments to take to Bolivia. For my next trip, it was enough for a full carry-on, and then it was enough for a full suitcase, and then it was 2, 4, 8. On one occasion, I actually hand carried 28 access bags. So you can see, and then it was thousands and thousands of medical supplies and equipment. So there's a lot out there, just really knowing how to channel it.
I think we may have time for one more question. And I saw Sarah has a question up there.
Hi, my name is Sarah Masafra. I'm a Fulbrighter from Bahrain, and I'm a student at the Masters of Public Policy program here at the Humphrey School. A quick question that I had, you guys all talked about like passion and keeping the fire on and involving the board members and so on. However, a lot of these projects that your respective organizations do are done like on a community level, and which means that a lot of the times it takes many years before you actually are able to harvest the fruit of your work. And then also to be able to conduct, for instance, an impact evaluation on your project, and to be able to collect solid, hard data to support your claims, or perhaps even not support the claims that you say that your project is going to yield. How do you basically buy time? And when, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of those board members want like fast, quick results in a year, in 2 years. You need to show me how you've been like working with my money and so on. So, thank you.
Insights.
Good question.
It looks like do you have something? You're looking like you.
I do? Okay. For me, evaluation is something that all educators have to do all the time, and so that is just something that's like reflex for us. And some of it is just a waste of time, but the good reports get made, and it goes into the system. We continue to get whatever we get because we're making those reports. I believe it relates to your mission. You have a clear mission, working with the people on the ground. I failed to mention that our group on the ground's been working on this for 10 years. So this started there. They have very clear goals. Whether or not they're met will be clear. And what we do to be subsumed in that and to make a measurable outcome and to be able to report on it, I think is something that I'm trained in research at Purdue. So this is I don't want to get sucked into that too much, but at the same time, I think it's part of our story that these measurable goals are part of our story. And then the qualitative pieces that come in that no one expected, but they are achievements, if you will, because we made a relationship with a little guy who had his first clean water that he knew for sure was clean. This is a story to tell. It's not just about the quantitative measures. However, I also know, having recently been informed, that our IRS, our international tax attorney, is just a godsend because he gets that reporting. He told me to think like an IRS person. I don't think I'm capable. And so we leave that for him. And I'll do the other pieces. But as far as speed goes, you can't force things that aren't happening. But at the same time, a report is expected. So there has to be attention.
I would just say everything takes longer than you think and is harder than you expect it'll be, and it'll cost more than you expect it to be. So you have to know that because it's always going to be the case. And strategic planning, obviously, is what kind of lays out your path, whether it's a business or a nonprofit, and you lay out your expectations and you revisit that every year. It will constantly change, but you have to have that vision of what you expect the next 5 years to unfold like, and the schedule and the budget that goes with that. And knowing that it will always change. And if you have a good board, as long as you're focused and if things are delayed, that won't be a problem. And some things might happen faster than you expect as well.
Anyone else? No. Okay, well, I'll turn it back over to Sherry to close out the afternoon.
Would everybody join me in thanking our panelists? I'm not sure how to wrap this up except to say that I'm impressed with the group that we have here today. I'm impressed with the people in the audience, with the other organizations that have co-sponsored this. I think that we have a unique situation in the United States as well as in Minnesota where these kinds of partnerships are very important to create. Citizens are more involved and want to be more involved in projects of this sort. Some people take the step of forming their own NGO. Some of them take the step of volunteering or participating with other organizations. So there are a lot of possibilities here, and I hope we continue this discussion, perhaps with this group and perhaps with others in the future. Thank you very much for coming and for sitting through this. We will have the film for this available to all the organizations and who have been involved in this, as well as on the Humphrey website. So check back or check with one of the organizations when that will be ready. Also, I know you all gave up lunch, and I apologize for that. We do have some fairly healthy snacks and Somali tea and coffee at a table outside in the atrium, and you're welcome to go there and congregate and maybe continue the discussion. Thank you very much.